The first time I met Mark was at an art exhibition in Paris. I was 28, still figuring out who I wanted to be. Mark had this magnetic energy, charming, confident, and endlessly adventurous. He swept me off my feet with grand gestures, vivid stories of his travels, and an unwavering admiration for my passions. It felt like something out of a dream. We married within a year. At first, our life together felt magical, like the fairy tale I'd envisioned. Mark's affection seemed boundless, surprise flowers, impromptu dinners, stolen weekends filled with laughter. I was working part-time at a bookstore then, a job I adored for the quiet joy it brought me. It let me indulge in books and my own interests, while still contributing to our life together. But soon after our wedding, the cracks began to show. Mark's charm gave way to something less appealing: demands, laziness, and a startling sense of entitlement. His freelance photography, which had once seemed exciting and full of potential, quickly revealed itself as unstable. He jumped from project to project, unable to commit, and his enthusiasm waned as his career faltered. Then came the first major shift in our dynamic. Mark insisted I quit my job at the bookstore, arguing it was best for the family. Reluctantly, I agreed, thinking perhaps he knew what was best for us. But it wasn't long before I realized I had been cornered into a role I never wanted: housekeeper, caretaker, and parent, all rolled into one. Mark contributed less and less, leaving me to manage the household, care for our son Leo, and keep everything afloat. By the time Leo was 8, Mark had become almost entirely disengaged, rarely involved in parenting or even the day-to-day rhythm of our lives. I was exhausted, trying to shield Leo from the growing tension in our home while secretly nursing my own resentment. Then, one day, everything changed. On my way to the grocery store, I was hit by a car. The impact was brutal, and I woke up in the hospital, bruised and broken, barely able to move. For weeks, I lay there recovering, feeling vulnerable and alone. Mark's response to my accident was colder than I could have imagined. He barely visited, and when he did, it was more out of obligation than concern. The final blow came when he walked into my hospital room one afternoon, holding a stack of papers. "You need to sign these," he said bluntly. "We need to finalize the divorce." I stared at him, my body aching and my heart even more so. The man I had once loved so deeply now saw me as nothing more than a burden. But I surprised him, and maybe even myself, by taking the papers with a steady hand and signing them without hesitation. By then, I had already begun to suspect Mark's infidelity. The confirmation came shortly after: hidden love letters in his studio, brimming with promises and tenderness addressed to a woman named Sophie. The betrayal was devastating, but it also brought clarity. With the help of a private investigator, I gathered evidence, photos, recordings, undeniable proof of his affair. When Mark pushed for the divorce, I was ready. He didn't expect my resolve, nor did he anticipate the financial independence I was about to claim. My father, Robert, had called me not long after my accident with surprising news. He and my mother were retiring and transferring the assets from their luxury boutique chain to me. 10 million euros. The sheer scale of it was overwhelming, but it also marked a turning point. With my parents' support, I moved into their home to recover after my hospital stay. For the first time in years, I felt safe. Their house was a sanctuary, bright, warm, and filled with their quiet, steady love.
As I rested and healed,
I found myself reflecting on everything that had led me to this moment. The divorce was finalized with little resistance from Mark. By then, he seemed almost eager to move on. As if our marriage had been an inconvenience he was relieved to escape. Signing those papers felt bittersweet, a sad end to a dream I once cherished, but also the beginning of something new. Life after the accident was challenging in ways I hadn't expected. I was still regaining my strength when I began planning for the future, determined to rebuild. My parents' unwavering support reminded me of the resilience I had forgotten I possessed. And though the path ahead was uncertain, I knew one thing for sure: I was done living for anyone but myself. I had left behind a life that once felt warm and familiar, stepping instead into the unknown. Recuperating at my parents' home was both a challenge and a blessing. Every day was a battle to rebuild not only my physical strength but also my fractured sense of self. Yet, in the quiet corners of their home, surrounded by their unwavering love, I began to rediscover pieces of myself I thought I'd lost. My father's generous gift of financial independence became a lifeline, a beacon of hope that I clung to as I mapped out my future. For the first time in years, I could truly envision starting over, pursuing my dreams and creating a life that was entirely my own. As my body healed, so did my spirit. I began to think seriously about returning to graphic design, a passion I had shelved for far too long. With the freedom my parents' gift afforded me, the dream no longer felt out of reach. The thought of sketching, designing, and creating something entirely mine reignited a spark I hadn't felt in years. But just as I was beginning to rebuild, Mark resurfaced. One afternoon, the phone rang unexpectedly, his hesitant voice on the other end. "Emma," he began, almost pleading, "can we talk? I've been doing a lot of thinking about us." I froze, the sound of his voice bringing back memories I had worked hard to bury. "What do you want, Mark?" "I know I messed up," he said, his tone unusually contrite. "I regret everything. I want to make things right." I couldn't help but laugh bitterly. "Now, after everything you put me through? After Sophie?" There was silence on the line, followed by a quiet confession. "She's not what I thought she'd be. She's nothing like you, Emma. I see that now." The admission stung, but it also reaffirmed my decision to leave. His regret didn't absolve him of the pain he had caused me, nor did it undo the damage he had done. "I appreciate the apology," I said, my voice steady and resolute, "but I've moved on. You should, too. Focus on Leo and on meeting your responsibilities, alimony, child support, all of it." Mark's desperation seeped through the phone. "Emma, please, I need you to understand." I cut him off. "Goodbye, Mark," and with that, I ended the call, feeling a mixture of relief and sadness. His words, though unwelcome, reminded me of how far I had come. I wasn't the woman who would bend over backward to fix his messes anymore. My life was my own now, and I was determined to protect it. Over the following months, I channeled my energy into healing and rediscovering myself. I began taking small freelance graphic design projects, working from the sunny corner of my parents' living room. Each project was a reminder of my capabilities, my creativity, and the person I was reclaiming. Then, another call from Mark disrupted the fragile balance I was building. This time, his voice was laced with frustration and desperation. "Emma, it's about Leo," he said. My heart sank. "What's going on?" "There's been an issue with Sophie," he admitted reluctantly. "She's struggling to manage things, and I'm overwhelmed. I need your help with Leo." I gritted my teeth. "You've been absent for so long, Mark. Now you want me to step in and clean up your mess?" He sighed heavily. "I know, I've made mistakes, more than I can count, but I'm trying to fix things. I just don't know what to do, and Leo deserves better." His words hit a nerve. As much as I wanted to shut him out, I couldn't ignore the fact that Leo, my son, was caught in the crossfire. I agreed to meet Mark to discuss the situation, though I made it clear this was not about revisiting the past, this was about Leo. When we met at a quiet cafe, Mark looked exhausted, his once confident demeanor replaced by weariness. Sophie was notably absent. "Thank you for coming," he began, his voice subdued. "I'm struggling to give Leo the stability he needs. He's been asking about you, and I don't want him to feel like he's being neglected." I studied him, weighing his words. "What exactly are you asking for?" "A better arrangement," Mark said, his eyes pleading. "He needs you in his life, Emma. Sophie isn't. She's not stepping into the role of a mother the way I hoped." His candid admission only deepened my frustration. "Leo deserves stability," I replied, keeping my tone even, "but this doesn't mean I'll uproot my life to fix yours. If we're going to figure this out, it has to be done properly, with clear boundaries." Mark nodded, a flicker of relief crossing his face. "Thank you, that's all I'm asking." Together, we worked out a plan. It wasn't perfect, but it was a start: regular visits, clear communication, and a commitment to prioritize Leo's well-being above everything else. I remained cautious, knowing Mark's history of flaking on his responsibilities, but I couldn't let my son suffer because of his father's shortcomings. As the weeks passed, I found a rhythm in my new life. Freelance projects began to pick up, filling my days with purpose and creativity. Leo's visits brought a warmth to my life that I hadn't realized I missed so deeply. And while the journey ahead still felt uncertain, I knew one thing for sure: I was stronger now than I had ever been. This was my time to build a life on my terms, for myself and for Leo. Whatever challenges lay ahead, I was ready to face them head-on. As my freelance work began to thrive, I finally felt a sense of purpose and accomplishment that had long eluded me. Each design project reignited my passion and reminded me of my innate capabilities. The quiet, steadfast support of my parents made it all the more meaningful, grounding me as I rebuilt my life from the ground up. My relationship with Leo blossomed during this time. Watching him laugh, play, and grow brought me a deep sense of fulfillment I hadn't felt in years. His joy became my anchor, a reminder of why I had fought so hard to start over. Meanwhile, Mark's life with Sophie continued to unravel, but I stayed focused on my own journey. His struggles no longer felt like my burden to bear. My priority was Leo, and I was determined to create a future where he could thrive. One evening, as I watched Leo playing in the park, I felt an overwhelming sense of peace. The road to this moment had been riddled with challenges, heartache,
and uncertainty.
But it had also been one of rediscovery and growth. I had faced my fears, stood my ground, and chosen to reclaim my life. It wasn't perfect, but it was mine.
And that was enough.
Life moved forward in its quiet rhythm, marked by small victories and a growing sense of self-worth. Then, one day, I received a call that disrupted the calm I had worked so hard to cultivate. It was Mark. "Emma," he said, his voice strained, "can we talk?" Curious and slightly wary, I agreed to meet him. We chose a small cafe in Paris, a bittersweet reminder of a happier time in our shared past. When I arrived, I barely recognized the man who sat across from me. Mark looked older, defeated, the weight of his choices etched into his features. "Thank you for meeting me," he began hesitantly. "I know I don't deserve your time, but I'm in trouble. Sophie's left, and I'm facing financial difficulties. I don't know what to do." I took a deep breath, bracing myself. "What are you asking for, Mark?" "I need help," he admitted. "I know I've made mistakes, more than I can count, but I'm drowning here. I can't keep up with the child support, the alimony, everything is falling apart." Hearing his plea stirred a complex mix of emotions. I had always known that Mark's choices would lead to consequences, but seeing him so vulnerable was unexpectedly jarring. Still, his struggles weren't mine to solve. "Mark," I said gently but firmly, "I've worked hard to rebuild my life, for myself and for Leo. I can't undo the choices you've made or take on more than I already have. You need to find a way to manage your responsibilities." His expression crumbled, and for a moment, I almost felt sorry for him. "I understand," he said quietly. I wanted you to know how sorry I am. I see now how much I hurt you and Leo." I met his gaze, unwavering. "Apologies are a start, but they're not enough. If you truly regret what happened, show it by taking responsibility for your actions." When we parted ways, I felt a profound sense of closure. Mark's struggles were his own to bear, and while I sympathized with his plight, I couldn't allow it to derail the progress I had made. I had fought too hard to reclaim my life and create a stable, nurturing environment for Leo to let anything, or anyone, jeopardize that. The weeks turned into months, and life unfolded with a newfound sense of normalcy. I found joy in the little things, a successful design project, a quiet evening with Leo, or a heartfelt conversation with my parents. My bond with Leo grew stronger with each passing day, and I took comfort in the stability we had built together. One day, while working at the bookstore, a side gig I had taken on to stay connected with the community, I saw a familiar face. An old friend from my past walked in, and we ended up catching up over coffee. As I shared my journey, she listened intently, her eyes reflecting both empathy and admiration. "Emma," she said softly, "you've come so far. It's inspiring to see how you've turned your life around." Her words stayed with me long after our conversation ended. They reminded me of the strength it had taken to overcome the obstacles in my path and the resilience I had discovered within myself. Reflecting on my journey, I realized it wasn't just a story of heartbreak or starting over. It was a testament to the power of self-worth, perseverance, and the courage to create a life on my own terms. I had learned that true strength comes from within and that embracing one's own value is the key to personal growth and happiness. The future remained uncertain, but I no longer feared it. My story was still unfolding, and while the road ahead might hold its own challenges, I felt ready to face them with confidence. Life was a continuous journey, and for the first time in years, I was excited to see where it would take me.